Welcome to MediaPath. I'm Fritz Coleman.
And I'm Louise Palanker.
MediaPath is your portal to pop culture, your curator of the best in arts and entertainment, and a great hangout for some of the most interesting people in their particular field. Today, our guest provided the driving force, the backbeat behind two of the ass-kickingest bands ever to rattle the windows of the world, Bad Company and Free. He's drummer Simon Kirke, and Simon's going to join us in a couple of minutes. We're very excited about it. Wheezy, what do you have today?
I'm so excited. All right. I watched a documentary series on HBO Max called Smartless on the Road. So Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes have a podcast that they call Smartless. It's three funny and gifted men talking to each other and to a guest who is booked by one in a surprise to the others. The podcast is such a hit, they took it on the road and filmed their adventures, which take off as they board a private jet, and Jason Bateman begins intimately discussing body functions, fuel going in, waste coming out, and the timing of said events within the framework of showering and associated ablutions. This train of thought is not any classier in black and white. But hang in, the relationship shared by these three is adorable. I'm not going to tell you that Jason moves on from that topic. He does not. But the secret guests, okay, begin singing loudly if you'd rather be surprised. The secret guests, Conan O'Brien, Matt Damon, David Letterman, AOC, pod bombed by Bradley Cooper. It's pretty fantastic. The series is 6 episodes in which we watch our heroes check into hotels, sample some local culture, order food, eat food, mock each other's food selections, consider how and when this food may be digested, and welcome devoted audiences as they record their shows live in Boston, New York, Brooklyn, D.C., Madison, and Chicago. If you've had enough of cooking shows and are ready for a show that considers what ultimately happens to the cooked food, this is your jam right here. I'm teasing the show with love, as is the style of these three engaging guys. Finally, in episode 4, they sincerely discuss their childhoods and their respective challenges, and we come to better understand why entree salads are so important to Jason Bateman. Oh, and Sean Hayes can really play the piano. His sister Tracy is darling, and Will Arnett is sweet and loving to his adorable kids. Smartless on the Road is on Max, and you can also find it on Prime.
So one of my good friends just came back from New York where they did several shows on Broadway and said the greatest Broadway show they have ever seen was Goodnight Oscar, where Sean Hayes plays Oscar Levant and at the end plays the entire Rhapsody in Blue on the piano because he's a gifted pianist, and they said it was spectacular. Now, it's over now, whether it gets extended or whether they put it on the road and it comes to the Pantages or something.
No, our Henry Winkler said the same thing on Twitter.
Oh, did he?
Yes, just raved. Over the top.
Yeah, he said it.
Sean Hayes.
Unbelievable.
So talented.
All right, I'm going to talk about a book called The Breach. It's right here in front of me. It's the untold story of the January 6th investigation. It's by Denver Riggleman. Now, if you're a political junkie like Wheezy and I are, you're going to love this book. The author was a former Republican congressman from the 5th District of Virginia. He also spent 2 decades as an intelligence officer and a national security advisor. He was appointed as senior technical advisor to the Jan 6 committee. He's a techie. So none of the revelations in this book are his or anybody else's opinion. It's all data-based, and that's what makes it scary. His main sources were various law enforcement databases. He reveals unpublished text from key congressional leaders, including Mark Meadows. He details communications from the Trump White House, even during that 8-hour period on Jan 6 when they weren't supposed to be having any communications from the outside. All the Jan 6 questions aren't answered here. It's just a fascinating additional bit of information for you. A lot of time was spent painstakingly connecting phone numbers with people on encrypted calls. That was part of the mystery. They got these texts, but they didn't know who they were from, and his job was to connect them to an actual human. You're going to come away with the goosebump-inducing theory that according to research and fact patterns, America has become a growing, militant, Christian nationalist movement being fueled by disinformation. Riggleman was the first government official to shine a light on QAnon. You're going to love this book, Wheezy. It's really good. It's scary, but it's good.
Wow. It sounds like it's confirming all my fears.
Yeah, well, that's the point. You know. All right, now we got an amazing guest today. Simon Kirke is a blues and rock artist and a songwriter. He was the hard drumming provider of momentum behind the band Free, with a mega hit, "Oh Right Now," and that band morphed. I know that was bad.
It's a little better when Simon sings it.
I know it. And the band morphed into a supergroup that always made you drive your car too fast. Bad Company, with hit after hit, like "Can't Get Enough of Your Love," "Feel Like Making Love," "Rock and Roll Fantasy," "If You Need Somebody," "Moving On," "Youngblood," "Good Lovin', Gone Bad." He also toured 3 times with Ringo Starr's All-Star Band, which has been the gathering of some of the most talented players in rock and roll for a long time. Welcome, Simon. We're so good to have you here today.
Hey, guys. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, your room looks awesome.
Listen, you blues and R&B lit the music fire for you, and Paul Rodgers too. And so you guys were a match made in heaven. You've got the same DNA sort of, and just to recognize Paul before we get into your biography. He has one of the most recognizable voices in rock history. As a matter of fact, Rolling Stone magazine ranked Paul Rodgers as the number 55 of the top 100 greatest singers of all time. That's not just a rock singer, that's all singers of all time. And he was just an astonishing voice in front of you guys. Talk about the start of Free with Paul in about 1970, and how did it get kicked off?
Well, it was actually 1968 that we got together. But just going back a little bit, I mean, I would put Paul way up. You know, I've never been a big fan of Rolling Stone's polls. Yeah, you know, I won't go, you know, I don't want to get into it, but, you know, it's all subjective. But, I mean, if you ask any modern singer, regardless of their genre, where Paul would rank, you know, they would say he's probably in the top 3 or 5 of their choices. So I put him way up. I put him in the top 10. But that's only my opinion. He is a wonderful singer, a great guy, and a good friend. So Free started in mid-1968, believe it or not. My God, 55 years ago. And I'd come down from Shropshire, which is on the border of Wales, and the border of England and Wales. I'd been given 2 years by my parents to try and make a go at this music career that they were not too crazy about me following. And I scrubbed around in London for several months doing menial jobs, and I tossed a coin, believe it or not. I've heard about this band called Black Cat Bones, which is way across the other side of London, which is a huge city. So for me to go from where I was to see this band was a big deal, like an hour on the subway. So when I got there, the band were okay. They weren't great, but they were pretty good. But the guitarist was amazing, a little fella, Paul Kossoff. And long story short, I joined the band, and I was in a semi-pro band. We went all over England playing clubs. And Paul took me aside one day and said, "Listen, I've just jammed in secret, don't tell the others, with this guy called Paul Rodgers across town. He's in another band. He wants to leave his band, which was called Brown Sugar, and he wants to form a band with me. Would you like to, play drums?" I said, "I'd love to," because I really like Paul. I loved his playing. Paul Kossoff. There are 2 Pauls. So we went to meet Paul Rodgers, and he was amazing. I mean, from right out of the gate, this voice. He was my age. I'm 6 months older than him. So we were 19. And he had this voice coming out of it like a 50-year-old black blues guy.
Seriously.
He played great harp, mouth harp, and he played great guitar. He really ticked all the boxes. And really, that was the start of Free. We got a bass player, Andy Fraser, and within our first rehearsal, we clicked so well, the 4 of us together, that by the end of 2 hours of rehearsing in this little pub, we'd written several songs, and we'd gotten such an amazing empathy between the 4 of us It was really uncanny. And then Alexis Corner, who was a sort of godfather of the British blues scene, he was like a mentor to Andy Fraser, and he popped in. He was going to a gig of his own, and he popped in to see how we were getting on, and he was stunned. He said, "Wow, this sounds so good." And then we said, "Well, you know, what on earth? What do we call ourselves?" We didn't know what to call ourselves. And Alexis says, "Well, I was in a band with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker called Free at Last." Well, you can't use Free at Last. How about Free? And we said, "Yeah, okay, sounds good." So that really was the beginning of Free.
And Paul said that one of his great influences was Otis Redding. And when you listen to his voice, you just hear Otis Redding all over his voice.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of my all-time favorite albums is Otis Blue. And that was one of Paul's. We have very, very similar musical tastes. Otis Blue is like, wow. Mm-hmm. First time I heard Otis Redding, like, wow. Mm-hmm. And he's a huge influence. And his drummer was Al Jackson Jr., and he's still to this day is my number one influence.
Was he a Stax record performer?
Yeah. Yeah, he was in the Stax house band, Booker T and the MGs. Mm-hmm. And that was Booker T on keyboards, Steve Cropper on guitar, Duck Dunn on bass, and Al Jackson Jr. on drums.
And the Blues Brothers band as well.
Yeah.
Those guys were amazing.
Was your childhood infused with blues influences like a lot of other British artists who kind of brought the blues back to America?
Well, not at all. In fact, totally the opposite. I never really heard of the blues until I went back to London. You know, I was born and raised in London, and then we moved to the country from when I was about 7 to 17, I've lived in this very remote part of England, and we just had a little transistor radio, no electricity, no running water. I mean, it was really a Spartan existence. And the only music that I heard was from a station called Radio Luxembourg, which was broadcast from Luxembourg, you know, between Belgium and France, tiny country. And they played a lot of American music, and which I didn't really know much about because obviously there was no internet. I couldn't Google. I mean, I just heard these amazing sounds. But really, it was the advent of the Beatles. When they came along in 1963, a year later they hit America. But in 1963, Please Please Me came out, the album. And on it was a couple of Tamla Motown songs, which I've never heard of. What the hell's Tamla Motown? But bottom line, no, I got a blues sampler album just before I moved back down to London with about 12 or 13 different blues songs on it. And it was what I loved about the blues. It was so simple. It was just a guy and a guitar, you know, and a very sort of Spartan band. And I love the simplicity of blues, but I never really cottoned onto it until I went back to London and we met Alexis Corner, who turned us on to blues artists like Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf, John Lee Hooker, and that's when I got this love affair with the blues and soul. You know, blues and soul were, to me, the sort of holy grail. All thanks to the Beatles, I have to say, the Beatles and the Stones. I think really, if it hadn't been for those two bands, black music would not have hit the shores of England like it did, because no one had really heard of any of these artists until the Beatles and the Stones championed them, if you will.
Well, Liverpool being a port town, they were getting an influx off the ships for the sailors, the record shops. Yeah,
and about that exact point, I was just going to say, Wheezy, I opened for John Mayall one time. We did a fundraiser long after the Blues Breakers, but he still does recording in his house. And he said, I said, what is it? Why do we have to be embarrassed by the fact that Clapton and Zeppelin and all these blues-based, the Stones, are guys that had to reintroduce American teenagers to their own music? And he said, well, he said in post-World War II London and the south of England, because the economy hadn't corrected itself yet, there was a lot of poverty, they were still bombed out, they were rebuilding the buildings. Somehow this music and the desperation in American blues music resonated with the London kids. And so not only musically, but just theme-wise, it really seemed to resonate with them.
Ah, that's very interesting. Yeah, well, John Mayall, I mean,
Yep.
the other godfather, and really between John Mayall and Alexis Corner, you had this sort of finishing school of a whole brace of people who are now very famous, or even maybe they passed away. But it was a whole, college of, Mick Taylor, Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and you had Ginger Baker, you had Charlie Watts, and there was Long John Baldry. That was the triumvirate would be Mayall, Baldry, and the other guy.
Well, you had two monster hits with Free, All Right Now and Wishing You Well.
Yeah.
And went on to sell like 20 million albums before you were through. But your getting traction took a minute with Free, right? You had released 2 records or something before folks started to recognize you, and then you did the Isle of Wight Festival in front of 600,000 people, and stuff blew up.
Well, we had a couple of years of just slogging around the circuit, particularly in England. And, England's a very small country. I love telling people that you can actually take England and fit it into Lake Superior.
But you shouldn't try.
You shouldn't try. You get a lot of English people very wet. No, that's a geographical fact. England is very, very small. But if you combine it with Scotland and Wales, you get the United Kingdom. And we slogged around that circuit and a little foray into Europe. Particularly Holland and Germany, but our main stomping ground was England, and we went around that little country for 2 years, getting a sort of a fan base, and playing primarily our own version of the blues. We did a few standards. We did like Rock Me Baby and Crossroads, but we really wanted to play our own songs, and All Right Now came from a very bad gig. Basically, it was we didn't go down very well, and we had a certain a sort of mid-tempo thing with us. Boom, back, boom, back, boom. It wasn't really something that you could dance to. It was something that you could bop along to. But after this particularly desultory gig, we got back in the dressing room. We said, we need a fucking something that everyone can dance to. And Andy came up on the spot with, All Right Now, Baby.
Yeah.
And it was born in that little dressing room in the north of England.
Wow. But it sounds like you guys had put in your 10,000 hours so that when you had your hit, you were ready to go.
Yeah, look, the whole thing about slogging around the country together in a little van, it just bonded you. I mean, we were really at our height. I think Free was really one of the best bands ever. But there's only 4 of us, but we played so well together. We always said there was a 5th member on the night when we were sort of levitating with whatever. And most of our gigs to before All Right Now were really, really amazing. And we particularly in the north of England, and we gathered this pretty amazing fan base. And then when All Right Now hit, it was a sort of a double-edged sword, really, because it was the culmination of these 2 years. It doesn't sound very long, 2 years of getting it all together. But in that 2 years, we probably played 500 or 600 shows. I would say nearer 600 shows. So, and then All Right Now hit, and then instead of playing a different town every night, we were playing a different country every night.
Talk about the Isle of Wight experience. That's the legendary place.
Not many people know that we did 2 Isle of Wights. The first one was in 68. No, I beg your pardon, 69. I got to get it right. And we were just sort of one of the opening acts, but it was, wow. I mean, that was something. But the next year, All Right Now had been a big hit. And this was where our manager, Chris Blackwell, from Island Records, managed to get us on this amazing lineup. It was Saturday night, the second night of the 3 nights. And it was a huge bill. And he said, I've got you in. You got half an hour. Well, we got there. We flew by helicopter from the hotel. It was the most amazing to look down and see this moving carpet of hundreds of thousands of people. The estimate was, about 600,000.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about Woodstock at 350. The Isle of Wight's banging 500,000-600,000 people every year. Holy cow.
Well, the advice that I was given was to play to the first 2 rows of people.
That's all.
Back in those days, there was no monitors. There were no monitors. You just played from the PA that was angled a little bit in towards us. So we had no monitors. I mean, people do 50-seater clubs now with a whole bank of monitors in front of them. It's incredible.
And in ears.
And in ears, yeah. So we got there about 3 o'clock. I think we were due to go on at 5. We got there at 3. And of course, it was chaos. And we were all nervous. We drank a little bit, smoked a little bit, and then it get pushed back. And by 8 o'clock, we were a little stoned. We were a little out of it. And Chris looked at us and he said, "You know what, guys? You're not going on. You're not going on tonight." We said, "Fuck, really?" He said, no, you're going to go on tomorrow. And it was one of the best things he ever did, because even though we were disappointed, when we finally left the show, we heard later on that it didn't finish till nearly 3 a.m. Sly and the Family Stone went on at 1:30 and played for an hour and a half, and they were due to go on at 10.
Wow!
So you can see what a mess it was. And so we flew back to the hotel, got up early in the morning, the next morning, Sunday, came back out to a beautiful sunny Sunday morning. And we went on, I believe, around noon or 12:30. And it was a wonderful, it was scary as hell, because Paul Kossoff's amp didn't work for 20 seconds. And then, there was feedback and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it was a wonderful show, and it really put us on the map, especially when we played All Right Now, because people were like, "Yeah, I love this song." And it really vaulted us, catapulted us to public attention.
You've benefited from some good management. You had Chris Blackwell, and then Bad Company had Peter Grant, who was Led Zeppelin's manager, who was also brilliant at marketing and doing everything.
Correct. Yeah, well, you had 2 different blokes who were, poles apart in terms of personality and how things were done. Chris was called the babyface killer back in the day. He was a great-looking guy, I know, but a very acute business brain, very personable. I mean, he was always ready to listen to you, and he was almost like part of the group. He was so nice. But behind that lovely facade was this acute
an axe murderer. I got you. Well, as you mentioned, you Free was not together that long, 70 to 73 or 68 to 73.
68 to 72, really. We had a little resurgence. About 5 years, yeah.
And then you and Paul went to start Bad Company, and you were joined by some other really storied players. You had guitarist Mick Ralphs from Mott the Hoople, All the Young Dudes, one of the most interesting and iconic songs of the 60s and 70s, and bassist Boz Burrell of King Crimson. So it really was kind of a super group.
It was. It wasn't our intention for it to be a super group, but because of Blind Faith, this new phrase had been bandied around. Blind Faith was Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood, and Ginger Baker. So, super group. But press like to have a little step up on how to launch something. So we became this supergroup, and it was a perfect storm. I mean, we were kind of veterans, having been around for 5 or 6 years in our various bands. The 3 bands were very well known, and we sort of shrugged off all the drink and drugs that had permeated Free, particularly with Paul Kossoff. I mean, Free would have been a lot bigger and a lot more well known in America had Paul Kossoff received the treatment that he should have received. We cancelled 2 tours. Paul's drug use really hampered the band in many, many ways. So to get with Mick Rouse, who was a lovely guitarist and such a great guy, funny. I love him to this day, even though he's been laid low with a stroke. He's incapacitated. Boz passed away about 12 years ago, unfortunately, but he was a great bass player, and it was just a perfect meeting of the minds. And then, of course, Peter Grant, who managed the biggest band at the time, which was Zeppelin. And it was fortuitous in that he said, well, we are launching a label called Swan Song, which is going to be Led Zeppelin's own label. And we would like you to be, on that label.
You were the first. You were the first band other than Zeppelin to be on that label.
Yeah. And so, and they, to do things in only the way that Led Zeppelin could do. They had a huge launch party in the Four Seasons in New York, and then they had another one at the Beverly Hills Hilton in LA, and the press was everywhere. And of course, we were trotted out as, the new band on Led Zeppelin's new label. And we took off. I mean, it was a wonderful launch. We could do no wrong.
It was mentioned that there was a lot of pressure because you were going to represent the success of the label along with the success of yourself there. So it was a lot of pressure when you first.
I never thought of it like that, but yeah. But look, we were well equipped. We had this. We've been rehearsing these 10 or 12 songs for ages, and we had a hell of a set. We were really primed. We were all in our mid 20s. We were just like greyhounds waiting to come out of the trap to go around the circuit. We were just rocking. And when we started out, I believe we opened for Edgar Winter's White Trash.
Holy cow!
We were on the road with Edgar Winter, without blowing our own horns. We kind of blew them off the stage every night. People were saying, "Who the hell is this?" And particularly Paul, who's this singer. Yeah. Because you've got to remember, we had a couple of paltry little tours with Free, but we never did a lot. We became a musicians group, but we didn't become, a popular group in the literal term. So Paul's voice really, and then the album got to #1 by the end of the tour, Bad Co. And Peter Grant flew out to Boston. The final show was in the Tea Party in Boston. And we all, Peter Grant's coming, oh, wow. And he said, listen, don't go on stage yet. And the lights had already gone down. When the lights go down, the crowd goes nuts. And he says, and he starts this speech. We're going, Jesus Christ, Peter, we got to get going. He says, no, let him wait. Come with me. And we went into another little room next to the dressing room. And there on the table was a sheet, and you can hear the people clapping. Oh, come on, what are you doing? And he whips back this sheet, and there's 4 platinum albums. And he said, this is what the days before the internet. We had no idea how the album was doing, and he said, this is for all your hard work. And they said, now go and...
That was beautifully timed. That was...
His timing was great. And we went out there and we just tore the place apart.
Wow. What was the year of your first American tour?
That would be 74.
And you guys had more chart success in the States than you did in the UK?
Oh, yeah.
What do you attribute that to?
We played a lot in America. And, you know, look, most of our influences were American. And I think if you ask any musician of my age, my era, and they'll say that, you know, we love the old blues guys. We love the guitarist, Chet Atkins, Jerry Reed, you know, Hendrix, even though Hendrix had to come to England to get famous. So when our stomping ground became America, we love the American audiences. English audiences can be a little, you know, I'm not denigrating them. It's just the way we are. We're a little like, okay, come on, impress me then. And as much as I love England and I love the English audiences, they can be pretty tough. Americans know how to have a good time, always had done. And we just ended up touring a lot in you know, in the States, and that's how we got so popular.
Tell the story about, I don't know if this is when you first went to Swan and Peter took over your representation, but there was a period of time when they wanted you to change your name, or not, they didn't want you to be Bad Company, they wanted you to be the Heavy Metal Kids.
Oh, no, that was not Bad Company, that was Free.
Holy cow. What a horrible name. That's like a parody of a rock band.
It's a great story. No, look, you got to remember that back in the late 60s, you know, you had bands like Clouds and Taste and Yes, rather nebulous names, you know, you couldn't really put your finger on them. So Free was, number one, the promoters, it drove from promoters and club owners mad because people would say, oh, we're coming to, it's not costing you anything to come in, man, come on. So they billed us as The Free, which is even worse. So anyway, when we had our first meeting with Chris Blackwell and the four of us, and Paul Kossoff and Andy pulled out a couple of cigars. I don't know what the hell they were doing, but big cigars, awful things. And this and Chris sort of disregarded it, but with a roll of the eyes. And he said, look, the name. Not crazy about the name, guys. And we're going, oh shit, here we go. It's not going to sell. We're having a blowback from promoters and club owners. We want you to change it. Heavy Metal Kids. Oh, God. Well, that went down like a hole in a parachute, I can tell you.
Seriously.
So we said no. We said no. We're sticking to it, inwardly quaking. So, and I'll never forget the words. He says, well, then we don't have a deal.
Oh, boy.
And so, okay. And there was this sort of stony silence. And the four of us, to a man, got up. Sort of said, well, thank you. And we sort of left the office. We got out and closed the door and said, what the fuck have we done? Oh, my God. You know, this is Island Records, the best record company in England at the time. And Andy Fraser, you know, the de facto leader of the band, said no. And he was right. He said, we're sticking to it. So we left and we all went our various ways. And that same evening, Chris Blackwell called Andy and said, you got a deal, 6 months, and with an option for us to, you know, to pick up the option. We'll give you a 1-album deal. We'll see how you do with 6 months of work. And we'll review after 6 months, and the rest is history, you know.
Wow. Heavy Metal Kids, that would have died a horrible death.
It would have
been the punchline to a joke.
No.
Yeah. Oh, well.
But I think it showed, apart from anything else, that there was a certain solidity between the four of us, that we were sticking to our guns, and we were going to go on our own merit, you know, not some awful name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So talk about your struggles with addiction and how, because, you know, you talk about being very disciplined initially in your career to prove to your parents, I can make a go of this. I'm the guy that's going to get this done. And then once you knew that you were locked, then maybe there's just a lot of temptation in your line of work.
Sure. Well, addiction, look, both my parents drank very heavily, and I'm a true believer that, and I've been in recovery a long time now, but I think addiction is inherited, it's passed down. My two brothers didn't get it, but I did. And I think it is inherited. But somewhere around the late 70s, I discovered Coke. And when I discovered Coke, everything went crazy. And you got to remember that in that time of the 70s, it almost became a currency. Coke was very, very popular. Everyone was doing it. And of course, it increased drinking, it increased drug taking to go to sleep or whatever. Then in the morning to get away from the soporific effects of Valium or anything that you took to go to sleep, you needed another bump to wake up. And so the cycle started. So around about 79, 80, I really got addicted to Coke and booze, the devil's cocktail, as it were. And I really went crazy for about 13 or 14 years before I finally sought treatment. I tried treatment for alcoholism back in the mid-80s. It worked for not long, a couple of months maybe, and then I go back out. It's a bugger. It really is. I mean, to be an addict it's a lifelong thing. I'm addicted to things that make me feel good, whether it's fast cars, although not addicted to fast cars, but I'm saying that there's food, there's sex, it's
all endorphins.
Say again?
It's all endorphins,
It's all endorphins, the quest for endorphins. So, and about that time, the late 70s, Bad Company had been working incessantly for about 6 years. And we were all doing it. Although I have to say, Paul Rodgers stopped in 1976. He stopped doing Coke. And his drinking, dissipated because of that. And but me and Mick and Boz, we were buggers. And so it became this, this thing that luckily I was always very fit. I was the fittest addict in the band, and I always worked out and did yoga and so on and so forth. But that was always in the back of my mind. And I sought treatment for booze in 1981, I believe, my first trip to rehab. And it wasn't until, about 8 rehabs later, my arrogance kept me drinking and using, that I finally shrugged, got rid of that monkey. And I go to meetings, I go to online meetings. I'm on the board of Road Recovery and Right Turn, which help addicts, teenage addicts, is Road Recovery. We help kids. And Right Turn helps musicians and artists with addiction. So, I'm just giving back.
And you've written a musical piece about it called Rock Bottom. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm collaborated with a guy named Woody Giesman and Tony Viveros in Boston, and Woody runs Right Turn, which is this rehab for artistic people. And about 18 months ago, he sent me some songs. I didn't even know he played. He's a drummer. He plays in a band called the Del Fuegos. And very, very well-known, very loved interventionist and counselor. And these songs were like, wow, man, they're really good. They just need a little bit of polishing. And so I went in my studio, which is behind me, and got out the piano and guitar and started sort of polishing them. And we now have about 15 or 16 really good songs. And we're finishing the script. It's called Rock Bottom, and it's about a man and a woman who fall in love, but they've got these monkeys on their backs called addiction. And it's I can't wait for it to come out.
Well, I want to thank you for all the work you're doing, particularly for kids. I have it in my family. It's a scourge. And the thing about it is, have you seen any of these shows? The latest one called Painkillers, which is about the Sackler family. And,
Yes, I have.
And Matthew Broderick plays Richard Sackler.
Yeah.
Spectacular job, wasn't it? It was just so out of character. It wasn't the guy from these comedies. It was so wonderful, and it's opening people's eyes. But we're in a really bad time with the opiates and fentanyl. And my son, who has struggled since he was 16 years old,
man.
And
I don't understand that whoever's, I believe it's the Chinese and with the Mexican, why put something that's going to kill your clientele? I never got that.
Precisely. It's like 50 times stronger than heroin. It's just awful. And
try 100 times.
Yes, and I'm just so thankful that my son's still walking around, but it's a horrible disease. My father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. And there's the guilt that goes along with praying that you're not the one handing this genealogy down to your offshoot. I've been sober for 40 years, but never was into drugs. I was a drinker, and it's an awful thing. And I thank you for Road Recovery and Right Turn and what you're doing for kids. It's a hard world, and it's so easy to be. You can be addicted to social media, the internet. There are so many things you can be addicted to now. Which is, it's a bad time.
Well, I'll take TikTok over a line of heroin any day.
That's right.
There you go.
Because there's no hangover from it.
Yeah, but you discovered that music creation actually can help folks, and that you really needed your guitar when you needed to express what you were feeling. And I wonder if, because I know that addiction is, there's something genetic about the tendency towards it, but do you feel like it can be just as much of a high to complete something, to produce something, to create something? No
question. That's a great statement. And I remember finishing a song last week, probably the final song of Rock Bottom, and it just came to me. I tried that instead of that because it just wasn't fitting. I'm going, what am I doing wrong? And I went to the piano and I just tried another way, and boom, it was like that final piece in the Rubik's Cube. And wow. And I couldn't sleep. It was like I'd had a line of meth. I was like, wow. And I got up and I played it again. And it's just, look, I'm 74 and I still get a kick out of creating. Of writing something that means something. It's hard. Whoever said it's 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration is absolutely right, because it doesn't come easy. And I'm watching this guy. I've learned, someone told me about this guy, Tommy Emmanuel, this guitarist, who is incredible. I mean, I hesitate to say about the best in music because it's all linear, it's all relative. But Tommy Emmanuel has done things on the acoustic guitar that just blew my mind. And he said a great thing. He said, I'm not in the music business, I'm in the happiness business. And if I can make you happy from my playing, then my job is done. And he practices every day. He's 68, he still practices 2 to 3 hours a day. So it's hard because until you get out there in front of an audience, there's only you and your garage band or whatever to hear back what you've created. But it's so worth it. And music to me has become my northern star. It pulls me through a lot of stuff. And I can't wait to, every day to sit down and play guitar and play piano. I don't practice drums very much because that's kind of ingrained in me now. But I just love playing music.
Well, it's kind of good that Paul dropped out of the drug scene when he did, because that could have trashed his voice big time, but didn't. He was smart enough to get out of it before he did, right? Especially.
Well, he has a wonderful wife. Cynthia has been so good to him. And I mean, he stopped drinking many years ago. Like most guys, we were not good drunks. I don't know anyone who's a good drunk. No. I don't think there's any such thing. But Paul...
I never beat anybody up, but I was an irritating son of a gun. I was tough to be around.
He's a wonderful singer. My God, he's still, my favorite singer.
You've toured with. Oh, did you want to say more about Paul?
Yeah.
No. I mean, he's still my favorite singer, and Bad Company's not really doing anything right now, even though we celebrate 50 years this year. I'm not really at liberty to say why we're not touring, but hopefully there'll be another tour in us. I know Frampton's doing a farewell tour, Aerosmith are doing a farewell tour. We're all saying goodbye.
Yeah, there's serious money to be made in saying goodbye. I mean, the Eagles have been saying goodbye. I mean, they're making hideous amounts of money on tour.
How many farewell tours did Sinatra do? I mean,
right.
Like 90.
Yes, Sinatra,
Yeah. So my question is, have you noticed when you go out like with Ringo Starr and just go out with a bunch of these legendary guys, have you noticed that there's like a personality type around drums or guitar or frontmen?
Ooh, what a good question. I know quite a few drummers, obviously, because that's my number one instrument. That's what I'm known for. And all the drummers that I know are really nice guys. Mm. They really are. Maybe it's the fact that we
You get out all your anxiety on stage.
we get rid of it. And I know Chad Smith, I know Greg Bissonette, I know Ringo, I know Carmine Appice. I used to know Bonzo. Bonzo was different. Bonzo never got rid of his demons. His demons got rid of him, unfortunately, because Bonzo, when he was sober, was a sweet, cuddly bear of a guy. And I think about him just about every day. I still miss him. But he was, he was an alcoholic Gemini, and he was on a road to destruction. But getting back to your question, drummers are great. Guitarists are highly strung. They're like, that's how they are.
Intricate.
Pianists can do Sudoku in 1 minute. They're from another planet, pianists. I'm so in awe of good piano players. There's a lady out there right now, a Chinese lady called Uja Wang, W-A-N-G. And check her out. She is just mind-blowingly incredible. But, she's like, wow. So I don't know. It's hard to categorize people in certain different musical types. But, that's as much as I can do right now.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if maybe that there's something that draws you to a certain instrument, like, about your personality.
I think the thing about drums is that it's a license when you're a kid to make a lot of noise and be like most boys. Oh, I don't want to get sexist here because there's some incredible young lady drummers out there on YouTube. My God, there's a Japanese girl who's about 12 now.
Wow.
And she does stuff that Bonzo was doing. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
This girl, like Good Times, Bad Times, by Zeppelin, and she does this amazing version, and she's only 12, and she can barely touch the pedals. Wow. So it's a different world now. Yeah.
Let me get one more question about Bad Company in here.
Yeah.
So Paul left Bad Company in 1986, and then he returned in 1998, and that I looked it up on the internet. That's the longest separation and remarriage in marriage history.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, seriously, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But he had kids, correct? He was the only one of you who had kids at the time, and he had to stop.
Yes. Yeah, he had kids. He had Stephen and Jasmine in the early and mid 70s. I didn't have kids until 82 when I had 3 daughters in fairly quick succession. So, yeah, he was a father at a pretty young age. Yeah.
Talk about your talent in music, in film composition, scoring.
Well, yeah, thanks. I ever since I was really watching movies, I've always thought, wow, that music goes really well with that, or no, I don't like that. I've had this sort of discerning nature about images and music, and I had a chance to score a couple of independent movies in the last couple of years, and I loved it. And one of the highlights of my life was when I sent a little piece. The director sent me a clip of about 2 minutes, and I put what I hoped would be right. And he wrote back and said, "This is incredible!" Twice. And I went, oh man. So that's really, as my career, my performing career sets in the West. I've had a great run. That's really what I'd like to get into. Apart from songwriting, I'll always do songwriting, but I would really like to get into scoring movies. And there's just something about looking at the screen and putting what I think is right. And I met one of the greats who only lives near me. I'm in Long Island. Carter Burwell, who does all the Coen Brothers movies, and he's great.
Wow.
He's so charming and easy to get along with. But he has this tiny rig. He's got one keyboard and a little bunch
you
of
can do it all
outboards.
electronically. You don't have to go in front of the Boston Philharmonic to.
Correct. Yeah, I know.
And you can do it from your little thing. Like what's his name? The guy from Nine Inch Nails is doing it. Does it all on one keyboard. The whole.
I didn't know. Oh,
What's his name?
Trent Reznor.
Yeah, Trent
Trent
Reznor. Our resident headbanger just spoke up.
Trent Reznor.
Trent Reznor. Yeah.
Trent Reznor.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that is exciting. And there's all sorts of ways for people to find each other, movies that need scoring, and then you finding them and them finding you. To me, the internet sort of explains the 12-year-old that you were describing, because she's able to find all the influences that interest her, whereas you were limited to that radio that you had in your little town bumped up against Wales, right? So that was it, and you were probably starving for whatever else you could get your hands on. And now kids can just go as deep as they want to go in terms of finding.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a triple-edged sword, the internet, because it's the most incredible tool, and yet it's it can be a portal to a really dark side. And for me, the jury is still out on the internet. I love it, but sometimes I hate it as well. But we live in that age, and there's no way around it. We have to live with it and accept it. And when I see kids in Manhattan or wherever I go now, everyone is on their phone. Everyone, and I admit that without my phone, I'd be pretty well lost. And people who say, "Oh, I'm off the grid for a week," I go, "Wow, how did you do it, man?" We're stuck with them.
That's just code for I dropped my phone in the toilet and I've ordered a new one.
Yeah, maybe.
For such a hard rocking band, it's just this wonderful driving beat that you guys had. You also flirted with some lovely country, and you wrote one of the beautiful country songs that Bad Company did called "Oh Atlanta." And am I right about that?
Well, I didn't write it. Mick Ralphs wrote it.
Oh, I thought you wrote it.
It was covered by Alison Krauss. Oh. Although I do have a couple of my solo albums have quite a few country I love country music.
Mm-hmm. What about Evil Wind? That was a Bad Company song, right?
That was a Bad Company song. That was the one song where I got to do a drum solo. That was cool. Paul Rodgers, Evil Wind. But country is huge, and good country is. Look, modern country is like rock and roll. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see Garth Brooks now. He has dry eyes. He has strobe lights.
I know.
It's the whole thing.
It's the whole deal, yeah.
Modern country is very, very good. And Vince Gill is one of my favorite guitarists.
Oh, God, what a voice.
Oh, my God, I love him so much.
I think he's out with the Eagles now, right?
He is, yeah.
Unbelievable. So I know you're not allowed to say a lot about it, because if you did, you would have to kill us.
Uh-oh.
But tell us, just give us a little about your thoughts about a memoir, which would be unbelievable.
Well, I've written a memoir, and I didn't write it for the money, because the money I was offered was pretty paltry, and it's not... I guess I wanted to write it to put in a chronological order, put my life out there in black and white. I've sent it to two people in my life, and they're both in the literary world, and they say it's one of the best rock and roll memoirs they've ever read.
Wow.
That being said, I'm not really... The thing about it, guys, is there's a lot of sex and there's a lot of drugs.
Oh,
and
that's awful.
Rock and roll, which is what publishers want, because they want to make money. And sex sells, drugs sell, rock and roll sells. So that's okay. But it would be a little embarrassing for my girls, for my ex-wife.
I get it.
Wives, my current wife. I don't really want to upset people for whatever advance I would get or royalties I would get. It's not really worth it. I did it as a cathartic exercise, and it's got some great moments in it. I mean, I've had a wonderful life. I'm going to call it "There's a Lion in the Living Room," and I thought that would get your attention. So
does.
I will explain that. That's the only story I will tell you if you've got time.
Oh,
Yes, we do.
please.
So I was back in my druggy days. I met a drug dealer in Tramps, which was a famous club in London. And he was living in Spain. He was an English guy. No, he was an American guy. And he said, I live in Spain, just outside Madrid. I want you to come and stay with me. So with my then wife and a girlfriend, we went to see this guy. And we got met by this chauffeur-driven limo in Madrid airport, and we went on this long drive, and we got there. It was up in this huge mountain, and there was this wonderful estate on the top of this mountain outside Madrid. And we got in. He wasn't there. Apparently, he was out for the afternoon. Something had come. So the maid said, make yourself at home, la la la, some lunch. So my wife and the girlfriend went to have a sleep and a rest, and I'm digging into my salad, and I suddenly heard this. Bloody hell. What's that? And I heard it again. So I sort of peeked through the sliding windows into this enormous garden, and there is a lion, a fully grown female lion on a chain with a long steel hawser running the width of the garden. And she was beautiful. It was so beautiful. But it was about 3 PM, and it was boiling hot. I noticed 2 large bowls completely empty. I assumed one was for water, one was for food. But this poor animal was baking and obviously very thirsty and very hungry. So I thought, what the hell? So I went out, and, I'm not a very brave guy, and she was at the other end of her wire. So I gently got the 2 bowls before she could sort of pad up to see who was in her domain. And sure enough, they were completely empty. I went into the kitchen, filled one with water, asked the maid, carne parallel, meat for the lion. Oh, yeah, in the fridge. So I got the meat, and I went out with these 2 bowls, and I put it very gently, this lion came up, and she had the biggest green, yellow eyes, and she came out, and she started wolfing the food down and the whatever. And of course, I became her boyfriend. And every time the next couple of days, she would roar. And Jonathan, the guy, came back in the evening. He said, "Oh, she likes you." I said, "Of course she bloody likes me, because I've given her food and water." You can't leave an animal like that. It's just an animal. He was not a nice guy. Anyway, I'll wrap it up. So I had to make a call to my accountant in London one afternoon. Everyone had gone into Madrid to do some shopping. I didn't want to go shopping. So I'm on the phone to my accountant, lovely lady, Joan, and I'm saying, "Hello, Joan, yes, well, invest that," and I suddenly felt this nip in my bum. I'm wearing shorts because it's a hot day, and swimming trunks, and I look around, and bloody hell, it's the lion. She suddenly somehow slipped her leash, nudged open the door, and padded over to see her guy.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm looking at these enormous green yellow eyes, and I said, "Joan, I'm going to have to go. I'll call you back. There's a lion in the living room."
Wow.
And, I managed, and then, I hung up, and then Druma, her name was Druma, she got up on her hind legs and put her paws.
Oh my God.
Chest. No claws, just a paws, because she liked me and gave me a big lick with this sandpaper tongue. And I led her out. I thought, she's going to, one swipe of those talons, I'm dead. So I gently put her in the shade and gave her some more water. And that was that story.
Wow.
Wow, that
Nice.
is.
But there's a lion in the living room.
That is your title, man. That's it, buddy. You're good.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, listen, thank you for, before we wrap up, I just want to thank you for just all the great sound you put in the universe, and also thank you for the good work you're doing on behalf of addicts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Using
been
your
a pleasure
talent.
talking to you.
A pleasure.
An interview is only as good as its questions and its questionnaires, and I do appreciate it.
Well, we
More than welcome.
love
It's a
talking
pleasure.
to you, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have all the pertinent links in our show notes. Here come your credits. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to continue this conversation with you on Instagram and Twitter, where we are at MediaPath Pod, and on Facebook, where our show page is MediaPath Podcast, and our Facebook group is MediaPath with Fritz and Wheezy Podcast Community. You can find full video podcast episodes loaded with bonus visual content on our YouTube channel, MediaPath Podcast. And you can write to us at MediaPathPodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please give us a nice rating in Apple Podcasts. We would love that. You can sign up for our spicy little newsletter at MediaPathPodcast.com. It only comes your way and bugs your inbox once a week. We want to thank our wonderful guest, Simon Kirke. Our team includes producer Dina Friedman, John Maddox, Bill Filipiak, Thomas Hubble, Mason Brown, Lori DeWall, Garrett Arch, and you. Our theme music is by me and John Maddox. I am Louise Palanker here with Fritz Coleman. Be well and wise, and we will see you along the media path.